Well, we are really thrilled today to welcome Randy Woodbury, who's the president of Woodbury Corporation and has been the president since May of 2011. But he's been with the Woodbury Corporation much of his career. Previously, he was the company's property management department, managed that department since 1981. And for a man born in 1975, that's quite an accomplishment at only 6 years of age. He grew the company's portfolio to exceed 10 million square feet in 13 Western and Midwestern states. He holds active real estate licenses and insurance licenses. In 1987, he earned the Certified Property Manager distinction from the Institute of Real Estate Management, and he served in many assignments with the National Realtors Association. He earned his graduate degree from a school north of us at the University of Utah with a degree in business finance and an emphasis in real estate. He and his wife have 3 children, all 3 of whom have worked at the company, and only 2 currently do. And we are thrilled to have him. You know, you're members of the Woodbury School of Business. We are thrilled at their support, not only financially, but the very fact that they take time to be at these type of events and many other events and sponsor many scholarships for Woodbury School students. Would you join me in welcoming Randy to the stage? And you do have a clock.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Are we working here, or should I be using that? Oh, here we go. I hear it. I feel it. I sense it. We're communicating. I am happy to be here with you today. It really is fun to be down here on this wonderful campus and to be among you. And we're so excited to be involved with Utah Valley University. We love the relationship. This past year has been an interesting year of reflection and celebration for us. We've spent a lot of time looking back on our own 100-year history, and it was fun to spend the year celebrating that. I've also found myself looking back on my own career. I don't think I'm planning to end that soon, barring stepping in front of a bus or some other catastrophe. I feel like I'm only 66, so I feel like I'm just kind of getting ready to go into the 4th quarter. But what I felt like I wanted to do today was to share a little of our history and try to give you some context of see if I can fit 100 years into 10 or 15 minutes here. And, good luck with that. I'm going to start by trying to share a little video that we did this past year for our employees.
I thought maybe it's best to kind of start at the beginning, so I'll tell you just a little about the characteristics of my father in his childhood. He was the go-getter in the family. Somebody gave him an old pair of ice skates. And so in the fall, he traded it for a baseball and a mitt. And then in the spring, he traded the baseball and the mitt for something else. They were his trading stock. A marvelous man. He was mostly self-educated. He imbued us with the importance of these basic principles of honesty, integrity, hard work, conserving resources.
He and Wally were really a perfect team, because Wally was what you would picture more your real estate developer, the guy who's willing to take the risk, the guy who's willing to dream up the big vision. And then Orrin was the guy who tried to keep it under control, to try to make sure that the T's were crossed, the I's were dotted. My name is O. Randall Woodbury, Guy Woodbury,
Lynn Woodbury,
W. Richards Woodbury,
Jeffrey K. Woodbury.
Woodbury Corporation is a 100-year-old family real estate business. We are involved in
the development and management of commercial real estate throughout the Intermountain West and in several other Midwestern and Western states.
I don't know how many times people say, well, most family businesses break down in the third generation. I'm proud of the fact that I think we've thrived as a third generation.
Well, I think there are a lot of reasons why it survives. We have a long-term viewpoint in how we look at assets. You know, our decisions are not 5-year decisions or not 10-year decisions. Our decisions are, okay, in 50 years, what will this property look like? Will it still be a good property?
In our family business here, we've had a lot of diverse opinions that have been shared, sometimes loudly. But when it's all over, we all go to lunch with each other and pat each other on the back because we know what is most important is our unity.
We've just always been taught that there's more strength in staying unified and working together than what we could do if we were to each individually go off on our own way.
We've always felt that family unity is kind of one of our #1 goals.
Usually, you know, when everybody agrees with something, the project usually is more likely to be successful.
I've had this long-term goal to leave what you got better than what it was when you received it.
It's been fun to see each of the members of the next generation come in and to find where they fit.
You know, it's just so exciting to see how much brighter they are than their parents and how much better they are at their jobs than we were at our jobs.
Certainly this is Woodbury Corporation, but we would hope that people would feel that this is more like a company family than just a family company.
Everybody has to have their own petunias to water. Then it works because they help each other and they sustain each other in what they're doing.
Well, I am genuinely excited about our future at Woodbury Corporation. I'm excited about the future for our family company and, as was referenced here, for our company family that now exceeds 1,000 employees. And I have confidence in that future because of the things that I can see in the rearview mirror. My grandfather, F. Warren Woodbury, left school early in order to help support his family. He went to work as a traveling salesman for the Dinwiddie Company in Salt Lake City. He always loved craftsmanship and appreciated anything that was well made, especially furniture. He even had ideas that he might make that his career and one day own his own furniture company. Well, he married my grandmother, Nina Richards, on August 15th of 1918. Now, World War I had been raging in Europe since 1914, but the United States didn't enter the war until it declared war on Germany in 1917. And even though Grandpa was a very good salesman, started to have problems getting product delivered as more and more factories around the country were converted to the war effort. And you don't get paid if the product doesn't get delivered. So with their first child on the way, he needed to find another way to make a living. And grandmother's older brother, LeGrand Richards, had just gone into the real estate business a couple of years before and had opened his own office. And Grandma was acting as his secretary. So in April of 1919, F.O. joined forces with his brother-in-law, LeGrand, and that started a lifelong love affair with real estate. Very shortly thereafter, LeGrand was called off to serve a church mission, and it became the F. Warren Woodbury Company. And then it didn't become Woodbury Corporation until 1935, and there's a whole story that goes with that, but we'll save that one for another day. F.O. worked hard. He was brokering deals, representing buyers, representing sellers. He was involved in land assembly of assembling parcels for new developments in this growing part of the West. But his specialty was property management, the very least glamorous but most fundamental role in the entire world of real estate. He had a passion for improving properties, for making them more productive than what they had previously been. And using creativity and frugality, he was always focused on finding a property's highest and best use. Well, success didn't come easily, especially during those Depression years. I remember him telling the story about after brokering the sale of a struggling clothing store, the only way he could get paid a commission, he ended up taking it in the form of a new outfit for each member of his family. There was another time where he got paid for a transaction by accepting a carload of long-handled underwear and spent the next several months brokering and bartering and selling that to convert it to something more useful and meaningful in order to support his family. And then there was handling the sale of a failing turkey ranch in central Utah, where after the transaction closed and all the seller's debts were paid, the only thing left with which to pay Grandpa his fee was, can you guess? Turkeys. My father remembered slaughtering and cleaning and prepping hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of turkeys, which they sold anywhere they could sell them, and those that were left unsold went into a rented cold storage container. Dad, you talked about the fact that they ate turkey in every way imaginable every day for an entire year. Well, many years later, Grandpa expanded the business by acquiring a company called Home Benefit Building Society from Heber J. Grant, and later changed the name to Home Benefit Savings and Loan. He then expanded further in creating a mortgage company. Franklin D. Richards from Salt Lake City served as the commissioner of the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, under President Harry Truman. And in 1953, when Eisenhower was elected, Frank resigned and returned to Salt Lake City. And in 1954, he partnered up with Grandpa, and they created Richards Woodbury Mortgage Corp. And a related insurance agency. Well, my father, Orrin R. Woodbury, he spent a decade pursuing a business management degree at the University of Utah. It took a decade because there were some detours in that time frame. He spent almost 3 years as a missionary in Hawaii, happened to be there to witness the attack on Pearl Harbor, which is another fascinating story that we will save for another day. And also had a period of time where he served in the U.S. Navy and became a flight instructor. But upon returning home, he created a construction company and worked as a general contractor and as a mortgage loan officer. My grandfather, about that time, turned the primary operation of the real estate company to my uncle, Wally Woodbury. Wally, he was just an exceptional deal maker and real estate attorney and teacher. And so for a number of years, he ran the real estate company while my father operated the mortgage company and the savings and loan. There was a 3-year detour in that period of time too, when my parents moved us to Honolulu, where they presided over the LDS Hawaii mission. Well, there was a point in the 1970s where Woodbury Corporation lost its bookkeeper, which led to the revelation that that one-man accounting department had totally left their accounting records in shambles. With several years of unfiled tax returns, it was a mess. And it was at that point in time that my father took on his second 8-hour-a-day job, and would spend the first 8 hours running the mortgage company and the savings and loan, and then spend the next 8 hours for a matter of years at Woodbury Corporation, forensically reconstructing several years of accounting records and getting caught back up with tax returns. That habit of working 12 to 16-hour days kind of stuck with him, really for the rest of his life. He passed away 3 years ago this month, and it was 95 at the time. In fact, he worked till 8 p.m. on the Saturday night before not knowing that he was going to end up going into the hospital the next morning with pneumonia and never to return again. So he left this world with his desk covered with depreciation schedules that he had been busy auditing. Now, I work an average of a 10-hour day, and that doesn't necessarily count time on weekends or time spent down in my hole at my desk at home. But you can understand why I still sometimes feel like a slacker after following the example of my father. Well, my career at Woodbury Corporation started at the age of 16 on the business end of a broom and shovel and driving the old 1951 Chev pickup that was left over from my father's construction days. And I was cleaning out properties, cutting down weeds, hauling loads to the dump, and it was a glorious period of time. However, when I was a high school senior, I quit that job and went to work for a neighbor that owned a couple of gas stations. Why? He was willing to pay me minimum wage, which was $1.65 an hour at the time, and I was only getting paid $1.25 working for the family. So there is such a thing as reverse nepotism. And I'm going to come back to that period of my life in just a bit. But after returning home from a mission, I went to work at Richards Woodbury Mortgage and spent the three remaining years of college and about 4 years beyond that working in various facets of that business. And it was a wonderful experience. I learned an awful lot. I started running the IBM System 3 computer. It was a massive machine. The room it required was about half the size of this stage. Most of the day was actually just spent sorting punch cards. And in the end, the computing capacity was probably a tiny fraction of anything that's on your wrist or in your pocket right now. But it was a good time for a part-time college student. But I also got, that led me to doing construction inspections, processing contractor draws, being a disbursements officer. Actually spent a year or two as a loan closing officer. Spent some time doing the secondary marketing of mortgages and ended up as the financial controller by the time I was about 27 years old. So it was a marvelous, marvelous experience. Well, in 1981, at the ripe old age of 28, my grandfather and FO and my cousin Rick came to me and asked me to make a move from the mortgage company to the real estate company and to take over property management. You have to remember at that time, 1981 was the last year of the Jimmy Carter administration, and the financial world was literally on its head. We had double-digit inflation. We were trying to close home mortgage loans at 13, 14, 15% interest. The bank's short-term lending prime rates were bouncing around 20. I mean, the world was really just in a mess. So when they came to me with that proposal, the thought was, well, how bad could rent collections and dealing with leaky roofs be? So I made the move. And that change really set the course of my business life for the next 30 years. Until 2011, as Tom said, that was when I took over the role of president and CEO. And now that's been almost a decade now, and here we are today. I'm going to shift gears a little now. We're going to move to a more familiar face. You all probably recognize Fred Rogers. Old Mr. Rogers is back in the limelight these days with this movie that's come out. And who of us wouldn't like to have Tom Hanks portray us, in our life, right? Well, there's an old video of Fred Rogers giving an acceptance speech at some awards ceremony. where he asked everyone in the audience to close their eyes and think of someone in their life who had made a profound difference in who they are today. Well, as I contemplate this and take a long look in the rearview mirror, I realize that there are certain people and certain life experiences that have made a big difference in shaping my future and in making me the person that I am today, and I want to share a few of those. I mentioned Hawaii. I had just finished 7th grade when my parents were assigned to go preside over a church mission. It was culture shock for this pudgy, shy 12-year-old. It was really a shocker for me. And yet, everybody was saying, "Oh, you're so lucky," and I was terrified. That first year of school was incredibly intimidating for me. Now, I have an older sister. She was one of those that came out of the womb with a 4.0. And so somehow, my parents found the way to afford to get her into the private school, Punahou, but good old Randy boy was not worth that kind of an investment. So I began 8th grade at Kawananakoa Intermediate in a completely different environment. Now, while Jeannie, I'm sure, got a much better education scholastically, I got an education in life that, looking back on it, I think may have turned out to be equally as valuable. Now, I knew my English teacher was making fun of me that first few weeks to the rest of the class, but I didn't understand Pidgin English enough yet to know what she was saying. And there were many days that I would come home to my mother in tears, but somehow I'd keep going back to school, and I kept my cool, and I made it through. Norm, you can probably relate to the feelings that I was having as a young man at this time. There were only a few other Howley kids in the school, and one of them I remember was really mouthy, and I remember watching him, and things did not go well for him. I did not want to be that guy. One day I was late for a typing class that was kind of at the far edge of the school campus and ended up getting rolled in the stairwell by a couple of big kids that were obviously sloughing high school. After that, I learned to go to school with a quarter in my pocket for school lunch and a bus ticket in my shoe so I knew I could get home. But what did I learn from this? That period of time, when I look back on that, I learned to roll with it, even if people are laughing at you. I learned it's great to make friends, but if you can't make friends, for heaven's sake, just don't make enemies. I learned to be on time. There's safety in numbers. And I also learned it's good to have an emergency plan in mind. Now, this isn't rocket science. This is 13-year-old survival logic, but it worked for me at the time. Well, during that 3-year period of time, there was one person that made a bigger difference in my life than anyone else, a fellow by the name of Lee Mack. Lee Mack was a kid that moved from Utah to Hawaii in his 20s. And some of you may know Kimo or Kalani Mack that started the Mobetta Hawaiian-style food chain. Lee was their father. Of course, I knew Lee before either Kimo or Kalani were even born. But our lives came together when he became my scoutmaster. And I'm sure during that period of time, I learned some good scouting skills from Lee because, we all had rank advancements and got merit badges, but I don't remember any of that. What I remember was the way that he treated us boys. That troop started out with just a handful of us. And by the time I was 15, I think there were 37 kids, all from different ethnic, socioeconomic, and religious backgrounds. It was a going concern, all because of Lee Mack. He was cool with us. Campouts were a blast. He was strict when he needed to be. He was funny when he could be, which was most all the time. It was interesting. I think back, he was caustic, he was cynical, he was sarcastic. I kind of viewed him as an equal opportunity insulter. He was one of those people that could make fun of you right to your face and insult you, but somehow it wasn't offensive just because you knew He loved you. He knew it was all done in love. You know, what I learned from Lee Mack was the value of being genuine. I learned from him the power of a sense of humor and how that can come into play in so many different situations, whether it's a defense mechanism or just a way to break the ice or a way just to be a smartass maybe. But I also learned the value of treating others with respect, and especially treating people younger than you with respect. Because when you do that, you automatically become idolized by those younger people. Well, next, of course, is my grandfather, F. Orrin Woodbury. I mentioned quitting my maintenance job when I was in high school. Well, I went to the gas station for more money. I made the move. Grandpa expressed his disappointment, but he wished me well. And what I was too dumb to realize over the course of that next year was what he was doing. He would periodically call me up and say, hey, I need you to come up and take a look at a power tool or a small appliance that isn't working and help me figure out if this thing can be fixed or not. Or he'd call me up on a Saturday with some little project in mind. I'm going to modify or build some shelves. Would I come help him with that? One time he came to me and he says, well, I need a little floor plan drawn of a part of an office here. And here's some graph paper and get yourself a tape measure and a scale. And if you would draw that up for me, I'd appreciate it. I thought I was just doing favors for my grandpa. What I didn't realize was what he was doing for me. He hadn't given up on me because I went to work somewhere else. He was continually testing me. He was looking for what my potential was. Where were my abilities, my talents, or maybe my weaknesses? Was I the kind of kid that could solve problems? Was I good with my hands or not? Was I someone that was good with people? All these different things, I didn't realize he was checking me out to try to determine where my potential was and how I might best contribute in the future. So when I look back on my grandfather, these are some of the things that I've learned from him. He always seemed to look for the best in people. He focused on their talents and on their abilities and on their strengths, not on their faults and on their weaknesses. And I found that that's a powerful thing because people have a tendency to rise to the occasion as opposed to slumping down, to the lesser measure. Well, next, I need to focus on my father, Orrin Woodbury. My father embodied so many desirable traits. He had an incredible level of self-discipline. I've already talked about his long work hours, but for decades he walked 3 mornings a week up the canyon above his home until probably long after he should have been doing that. He did it until he got hit by a car that was backing out of the driveway one morning that couldn't see him waddling with his cane coming down the canyon road. But even that didn't stop him. He stopped walking up the canyon, but instead he went and bought a Planet Fitness membership. And a couple of mornings a week he was over there. I'm pretty confident he was the only 90-plus-year-old person in the gym. But he was there. He was there on the Monday before he went in the hospital, never to return. I look at that example, and he had many other habits. He was the kind that would always pick up the tab when eating out with others. He was a master at keeping confidences and doing little charitable acts behind the scenes. My father treated everyone with equal respect. Didn't matter if you were the governor or if you were the room steward on the cruise ship. And there was no better testament to that than at his funeral, where in addition to family and friends and business leaders and church leaders, also in attendance were 3 waitresses from the Sizzler, the manager and his wife from the KFC Taco Bell that he and my mother used to frequent, and 2 of the kids that worked the front counter at Arby's. They loved him because of how he treated them. Dad had a gift of much wisdom, and he had a way of being able to use that wisdom to give good counsel. There's one particular example of that has been so meaningful to me throughout my life, and this took place in 1969. I had just turned 16. We had recently relocated back to Salt Lake from Hawaii. Dad was serving as a youth leader for the kids my age, which also made him the coach of the athletic teams for basketball and volleyball. And I will tell you that I have been blessed with many, many great things in my life, but among them is not athletic ability. I've never had any athletic ability. I always did everything I could to avoid sports, whether it was in school, whether it was in church or anything, just because I was so crappy at it. But now Dad was the coach. Felt like I had to support him. Well, one night we're at a junior high school having church volleyball games, and we had utilized the locker room that evening to change. This was before y'all just wore shorts to school, but we had used the locker room to change, and I didn't want to be there in the first place, but I was there. Well, the games got over, and we went back in the locker room to change. We hadn't had locks for the lockers, and found that, the lockers had been ransacked, and all the money had been stolen out of my wallet. I had just been paid that day and cashed my check, and you'll laugh at this, the entire $30 was taken out of my wallet. You can laugh, but in 1969, $30 was real money. In 1969, I could buy 100 gallons of gas with $30. So it was real. Well, I'll tell you, I was one bitter kid that night. I mean, I was mad that there weren't locks for the lockers. I was mad that something like that would happen at a church-sponsored game. I was mad that I had to be there in the first place. And I went on and went home, and I put on a show for my mother, my sisters, my little brother. I was just so full of rage and anger at what had happened to me. Well, later that night, my dad gathered the entire family in my room for a family prayer. Oh, crap. The last thing in the world that I wanted to be involved with at that moment was a prayer. At least he didn't ask me to give it, because who knows what type of curse I might have tried to call down upon, this creep that took my money. But that wasn't how Dad's prayer went. He simply gave thanks that it was his son that had been stolen from. And not his son that had done the stealing. And somehow it just didn't feel satisfying to be angry anymore. I learned a great lesson that night. It does you no good to harbor ill will and resentment when you've been wronged. It eats you up inside, from the inside out. It destroys you while the offender just goes on his merry way, doesn't even know what's going on. But that lesson has stayed with me for the 50 years since. And I have always tried to just let it go and get over those situations where I've been hurt or offended, and just let those things roll off my back. So from my father, I've learned the value of hard work and self-discipline. I've learned to be charitable and generous if you're in a position to do so. I've learned the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect, no matter what their position or status in life is. And I've learned not to hold grudges or harbor ill will. Well, another hero in my life, I need to hold this up. Another hero in my life is my cousin, Lynn Woodbury. Lynn's a year older than I am. He leads our architectural and construction departments. And he's done so for over 30 years without the use of his hands, his arms, or his legs. Quadriplegic as the result of an accident that broke his neck many, many years ago. He is an inspiration to me because he's at work every day. He's just an incredible example of prevailing over incredible odds and incredibly difficult circumstances. For someone in that profession, I've seen him spend a great amount of time when he's reviewing a plan or a design and there's a change that he thinks should be made. And if he could just pick up a dang pencil in 2 seconds, he could say, no, let's do this detail this way. But instead he has to verbalize it and try to explain it. And I look at the amount of frustration that I would never have the patience to have done that. But he bears a heavy load of responsibility and performs far beyond any expectations that we were given all those years ago at the time of his injury. So from Lynn, I've learned the importance of never giving up. I've learned that you can do hard things. They're not easy, but you can do hard things. I've learned that any time you think you have it bad, look around, because you can always find somebody that's in worse shape, and be thankful for that. Lastly, I want to talk about a friend by the name of Scott Whipple. Scott, after a career as a teacher and a principal, he founded and directed the Granite Education Foundation and operated that, was in charge of that for over 20 years until he fully retired. And to shine a light on outstanding teachers and to help meet the needs of underprivileged students that needed extra things just to get by. And I had the chance to work with him for a number of years. He's a hero to me just because he's humble, he's unassuming, he's simple, but he's just the greatest person to be around because he makes you feel so good. He lifts you up, he compliments, and he's genuine about it. He's gracious. From Scott, I've learned the value of being free. It doesn't cost you anything to give a compliment as long as it's genuine. Any of us can see through something that's disingenuous. But be free with compliments. Be gracious. You'll find that it does lift people up. And once again, people tend to rise to the occasion and be better when they're thought of better. Well, as we set out on our journeys of life, we never really know where the road is going to take us. We don't know where the path's going to lead. Like it or not, all of us are going to leave tracks from our life here on this earth. It's not too early for you to be thinking about what kind of trail you want to leave behind. Maybe for you, you're going to do great things and you're going to be in a position where there's wonderful accolades and fanfare that comes with it. Maybe you'll spend your life doing good that's largely hidden and behind the scenes and unaware to anyone else. I would just say, but the fact that you're here today tells me that you're the kind of people that have probably already committed that you're going to make a difference in this world. You're going to make this world a better place for your having been a part of it. So I would just say, look ahead with anticipation and chase your dreams, but don't forget to occasionally look back in the rearview mirror. Often we just don't fully appreciate what we're in the midst of without taking some context by looking back on where we've come from. When I look at the tremendous growth that has taken place in the south part of Salt Lake County and all down through Lehigh and the whole Silicon Slopes area, it's just phenomenal to me. And I often find myself wondering, if you look at the picture on the far right, is there any way in the world that my grandfather could have, in his wildest imaginations, pictured what that south end of the Salt Lake Valley looked like when he assembled the parcels for the state of Utah for the construction of the prison at Point of the Mountain? I go back to my own childhood. My mother used to take me to Sugar House. That was where we would go shopping, on Simpson Avenue or on Wilmington Avenue, to some of the little shops there. I never could have imagined at that time that we would be involved, that I would have the chance to be involved in the redevelopment of that area into what it's become today, with student housing and apartments and offices and restaurants and hotels and senior living. It's such a vibrant place. We built the University Mall and opened it in 1973. And although over the years there's been continual expansion and renovation and improvements there, I wonder if Wally or Orrin or FO could have ever imagined the type of things that we've been doing with the redevelopment of that University Place campus today. The future is bright. It's bright for Woodbury Corporation, and I'm excited about it. But these opportunities and others that await us in our future, I know could not come to pass were it not for the things that have happened in our past, the things that we've seen in the rearview mirror. The value of a good reputation, of having good ground plowed ahead of you. The value of maintaining impeccable credit. The value of being taught a strong work ethic. Learning to keep ego and feelings of entitlement in check. And for us especially, the value of unity. You heard it repeated several times in the video. We believe that that's our strength. We believe that that's our secret sauce of keeping it all together, and we're working one for all and all for one. Well, for some reason, anytime I'm speaking, I always like to close with a quote. It's my favorite quote from my grandfather, and this was actually just something that he left on my desk in a handwritten note back in about 1978. I walked in and I saw this note that said, "An optimist will build castles in the sky. A dreamer will live there. And a realist will collect rent from both of them." Actually, in closing, we're going to go back to Mr. Rogers, because why not, right? Well, I told you that at that awards ceremony, he asked everyone in the room to close their eyes for 30 seconds and think of someone in their life that had made a profound difference in who they are today. What I didn't tell you is what he did next. When all the eyes were back open and upon him, he simply said, "Who will think of you when asked that same question?" Thank you. I've really enjoyed being here with you today. Did you want to take some time for some questions? He asked, are there any risks that I didn't take that I regret or did take? And either way, flip side, regrets. I've always been very conservative in my nature. You know, out of the family, I'm the right one to have spent most of my life in property management, not being the development guy, the big dreamer, looking at what a project could have been. So I don't know that I would really say that I have regrets in that, but sometimes, you know, maybe it's a little jealous to think, I wish I could be that kind of person. But on the other hand, you know, that was the magic of how my father and my uncle worked together, because my uncle was the dreamer. He was the deal guy. He was out there. But he recognized that what allowed him to do what he did was the fact that my father was sweeping up behind him all the time and making sure that things were under control. And we've found in our generation, you know, the five of us in my generation, we have our strengths and our weaknesses, and we play off each other pretty well. So I'm not sure I have many regrets there, but I've been very fortunate that we've been able to work closely as a team and be able to utilize the strengths and the talents of those that are good in one area and rely on the strengths and talents of some of us more boring people in another area. Thank you. When was the time that I laughed the hardest? Well, you know, it's crazy because 50 years later, sometimes when I'm going to lunch with my cousins and stuff, what do we end up talking about? we end up talking about some of those stupid things that happened to us when we were cleaning out buildings, when we were, doing that kind of stuff. There was a period of time where I knew more people out at the county landfill by name than I did in the office, It was a real classy time of life. But we had some really fun experiences doing grunt work. There's a few of them that come to mind that I'm not going to share with you because it's right before lunchtime. But, some of that is looking back on what at the time were really horrible, gross experiences, but this many years later you can go, well, that was really pretty funny. It's an interesting question. Being a family-run company, how do we settle disputes? I should probably turn to Taylor, our COO and Gen 4 leader here to answer that. But actually, we air things. We air things that we've scared more than a few receptionists and secretaries that sit outside of conference rooms when the voices get pretty loud and opinions get pretty strong and things get pretty emotional. But in the end, when we make a decision, we're unified in that decision. And we don't go back and point fingers and try to Monday morning quarterback it. We're in it together. Sometimes that means we just walk away from it for a while. Sometimes we come back and there are projects that we have not done because we've not been able to come to an agreement that everyone was willing to be in it. It's interesting because it's not all business, it's family business. And for us, it's so intricately entwined that, a lot of the issues we're talking about, when we're making decisions, some would argue, hey, these are estate planning decisions. There's a lot of nuances and stuff, but we really do love and respect each other. And it's not like it's just us. Yes, we have family members, where there's the 5 of us in Gen 3, there's 18 of Gen 4 that are, well into careers. But then there's the other 150 people in our office and, the other 900 people elsewhere. So it's a wild dynamic, but we do strive really hard to find unanimity in decisions.